David Sokol thinks that he will be able to get away with the same crimes that a guy like Charlie Munger can. But I think, remember, the law only applies selectively to certain people. Some guys are just totally exempt from them. And you see this in this following headline, Max: how a big U.S. bank laundered billions from Mexico's murderous drug gangs. So this is the Guardian News, and they've done a deep investigation into the story that we've covered before, which is Wachovia Bank. And they were found to have laundered $378 billion, or 30% of Mexico's GDP in this time, of drug money.
The cocaine.
Of cocaine, yes. $378 billion.
$378 billion laundered through Wachovia, which of course now is owned by Warren Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway. And of course he's never talked about that either. And it's a huge part of the Mexican GDP. And the bank paid a fine.
Well, it's $378 billion in money laundering through the Casas de Cambio, and they paid a $110 million fine, or less than 2% of 1 year's profits from Wachovia. Wachovia is now owned by Wells Fargo. Warren Buffett owns 6.5% of it. But from this article, there's a very interesting point that I want to note that relates to this whole financial catastrophe. First of all, Wachovia started really getting involved in these Casa de Cambio in 2004, just when the violence really started getting extreme in the Mexican drug wars. In April and May of 2007, 3 years later, Wachovia, as a result of increasing interest and pressure from the U.S. Attorney General's office, began to close its relationship with some of the Casas de Cambio. And then in July of 2007, all of Wachovia's remaining 10 Mexican Casa de Cambio clients operating through London suddenly stopped. July 2007. What happened in August of 2007?
The world credit crunch.
The world credit crunch began.
So what we see here is that the global banking liquidity is funded from the Mexican cocaine drug cartels. When somebody decided to go after them, they withdrew their liquid cash, because remember, in the global economy, it's all credit and paper money. There's actually no cash except for the drug money. They took the drug money off the market, and they crashed the global economy. The reason Bear Stearns went bankrupt, the reason Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, is because the Mexican drug cartel withdrew their cash from the market as a protest against the investigation. In other words, so Wachovia, if I'm following this correctly, they had to pay a fine. No further investigation was pursued, presumably because if they went after this story deeper, the Mexican drug cartel would threaten to withdraw the money again and throw the global economy back into a total standstill?
Well, I think they learned their lesson, because let's go on to the next headline. The bank run we knew so little about. This is from the New York Times' Gretchen Morgenson. And she looked at the Federal Reserve Freedom of Information documents that were released only last week. This is based on the Bloomberg News efforts to force the Fed to release information that who they were loaning money to at the Fed's discount window. And it turns out, according to Gretchen Morgenson, in August 2007, as world financial markets were seizing up, domestic and foreign banks began lining up for cash from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. That August 20th, Commerzbank of Germany borrowed $350 million at the Fed's discount window. 2 days later, Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Wachovia each received $500 million. Now, banks only go to the discount window when they're in serious crisis and they're facing a liquidity crunch. Thus began, Gretchen Morgenson says, the bank run that set off the financial crisis of 2008.
So, in retrospect, it was set off by Mexican drug gangs.
The ending of the money laundering via the banks. Without that access to liquid cash, they froze up, because it turns out, it appears that drug money was the only cash in the system. Americans don't have jobs. We only have debt. Brits only have debt. There is no cash. There's no liquidity. There's only crime.
All right, so we covered this story at the time, and we've said it. We talked about this, and we
suspected it, yeah.
And we said that the crash of 2008, the only way that the wheels of global banking systems started turning again was that the money was released by the Mexican drug lords. But
Yes.
what we're saying today is that the reason why the crisis happened to begin with
Exactly, yeah.
was that with the withholding of the cash. And I remember, let me tell you something, Stacey. I remember just very vividly when I was working on Wall Street in the 1980s. Every Friday, we used to have cocktails on Park Avenue and watch this parade of limousines travel down Park Avenue into the basement of Citibank. Everyone knew this was money that was being laundered by Citibank from drug money. This was an open secret. Nobody doubted this. So I'm glad to see now, at least 20, 25 years later, people are beginning to understand that the global finance community, the global banking system runs entirely on cocaine money. So when they say, well, why is the war on drugs failing? Because they need the cash to run the banks. Why is the drug problem so rampant around the world? Because bankers need that money to pay their bonuses. The bankers, when we say bankers are terrorists and they kill people, and they have the moral equivalency of a Mexican drug lord lopping the head off a baby to support their crime syndicate, that's what we mean. They're the same. They're the same two faces of the same coin. They're terrorists. Blankfein, Diamond, Jose, whomever, drug lord, they're all terrorists. They all revolve around cocaine and money laundering, and now we know unequivocally, based on the Gretchen Morgensen's report and others, Wachovia Bank, of course, Warren Buffett's now involved with that. Who knows what Charlie Munger's habit is? The guy must be a horse.
At the time, up until July 2007, when money was circulating through the banking system from the Class A drug dealing, those CDOs, backed by Wachovia Bank, JP Morgan, Bank of America, all these other banks that went the following month to the Fed, prior to that, their CDOs may have been A-rated. Following that, all the downgrades happened. Now, we first reported on this in 2008 when Antonio Maria Costa, then head of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, said he had evidence to suggest the proceeds from drugs and crime were the only liquid investment capital available to banks on the brink of collapse. He said, quote, interbank loans were funded by money that originated from the drugs trade. There were signs that some banks were rescued that way.
All right, and again, here's another aspect to it. Why do analysts give these CDOs a rating of AAA? Why does Moody's, S&P, Fitch give what is obviously garbage a AAA rating? Isn't it clear they're high on cocaine?
Well,
isn't it clear the people at Moody's, the executives at Moody's, Fitch, and S&P need to be in rehab immediately because they're taking massive quantities of cocaine to support their delusions?
yeah, but Max, what it's suggesting now, that Wachovia has not been put in trouble. There's no criminal sentence. There's nothing but a tiny, 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 minute little fine, like pocket change. They're saying it's AAA rated now because Class A drugs are once again backing up the collateral that we're offering, the assets we're selling.
I guess this is again why the Federal Reserve doesn't want an audit. Because if you open up the vaults there at the Fed, whether it's the Fed in New York or the one in Washington, you're going to find Pablo Escobar sniffing 20 tons of blow.
Yeah, if you go sniffing around the Federal Reserve, you might...
Don't go sniffing around the Federal Reserve unless you've got,
Charlie Sheen type nostrils.
Charlie Sheen type nostrils. All right, well, Stacey Herbert, thanks so much for that investigative journalistic piece on the cocaine trade in Wachovia.
Thank you, Max.
Well, we'll be coming back with a lot more right after this, so don't go away.